Hi, Alex. Today, let's talk about a really effective way to practice speaking English, which is role playing. Have you ever tried using role playing to improve your English?
Hi, Myra. I've heard of it, but I'm not quite sure how it really works. Can you give me a brief introduction first?
Sure. Role playing is all about creating imaginary or real life scenarios and then taking on different roles to have conversations. It's like acting out a little play, but the focus is on speaking English. For example, you could pretend to be in a coffee shop ordering coffee. One person is the barista and the other is the customer.
Oh, that sounds interesting. But how does it help with improving English?
Well, it has several benefits. Firstly, it forces you to think on your feet and respond in English immediately. When you're in a real life-like situation, you don't have time to look up words in a dictionary. You have to use the vocabulary and grammar you already know, or try to figure out new ways to express yourself. Secondly, it helps you get used to the flow of natural conversations. In textbooks, dialogues are often a bit too perfect. In role playing, you can have interruptions, misunderstandings, and all the messy parts that happen in real conversations.
I see. So, where do we start if we want to use role playing for English practice?
First, we need to choose a scenario. The scenarios can be as simple or as complex as you like. For beginners, something like a shopping scenario is great. You can go to a store, which could just be your living room, and one person is the shop assistant, the other is the customer looking for clothes, for example. As you get more advanced, you could try more complicated scenarios, like a business meeting or a debate.
That makes sense. What about choosing the roles?
When choosing roles, try to pick ones that suit your personality, or ones that you want to explore. If you're usually a shy person, you could take on the role of an outgoing salesperson. It's a great way to step out of your comfort zone. Also, if you're practicing with a partner, make sure you switch roles so that both of you get to experience different speaking situations.
Okay. Now, let's say we've chosen a scenario in our roles. How do we actually start the conversation?
Well, you start with an opening line that fits the scenario. For example, in the coffee shop scenario, the customer could start with, "Hi, I'd like to order a coffee, please." Then the barista would respond, maybe asking, "Sure, what kind of coffee would you like? We have espresso, cappuccino, latte." You see, this is where you start using practical English. And remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. In fact, mistakes are great because you can learn from them.
Right. But what if I don't know a word during the conversation?
That's a common problem. If you don't know a word, try to describe it. For example, if you don't know the word muffin in the coffee shop scenario, you could say, "You know, that small, round baked thing that's usually sweet and has chocolate, chips, or blueberries in it." Also, you can ask your partner. Say something like, "What's the word for this in English?" This is a very natural part of language learning, and it's important to be able to communicate even when you don't know all the words.
Got it. What about adding more depth to the conversation? It seems like just ordering coffee could get a bit boring after a while.
Exactly. That's where improvisation comes in. Once you've done the basic part of ordering, you can start adding extra details. The customer could say, "I'm really tired today. I hope this coffee will wake me up." Then the barista could respond with something like, "I know how you feel. It's been a long day for me too. By the way, did you see the new movie that just came out?" This way, you're not only practicing basic transactional English, but also more casual, conversational English.
That sounds really good. But what if I'm practicing alone? Can I still do role playing?
Absolutely. When you're alone, you can still create scenarios in your mind. For example, you could imagine you're on a trip and you're talking to a tour guide. You can play both the tour guide and the tourist. You can even record yourself. First, record one side of the conversation as the tour guide, then play it back and respond as the tourist. This way, you can listen to your own pronunciation, intonation, and the flow of your speech.
That's a great idea. I never thought about recording myself. How can I use the recording to improve?
Well, listen to it carefully. Notice if you're speaking too fast or too slow. Check your pronunciation of words. Are there any words that you mispronounced? Also, pay attention to your intonation. In English, intonation can change the meaning of a sentence. For example, a statement like, "You're coming," with rising intonation is a question, while with falling intonation, it can be more of a confirmation. By listening to your recording, you can identify these areas and work on improving them.
I see. What about using role playing to practice specific English skills like negotiation?
Role playing is perfect for that. You can create a business negotiation scenario. One person is the seller of a product, and the other is the buyer. The buyer wants to get the best price, and the seller wants to make a profit. You can use phrases like, "I'm afraid your price is too high. Can you offer a discount?" Or, "This product is of high quality, so the price is reasonable." Through this kind of role playing, you can learn and practice the specific vocabulary and phrases related to negotiation.
That sounds challenging but really useful. What if I want to practice my English for a specific profession, like being a doctor?
Well, you can create a doctor-patient scenario. The doctor needs to ask the patient about their symptoms, like, "What seems to be the problem? Do you have any pain? When did the symptoms start?" The patient then describes their condition. This not only helps you learn medical English, but also how to communicate with patients in a professional and empathetic way. You can also include more complex situations, like a doctor explaining a diagnosis to a patient or discussing treatment options.
So there are really so many possibilities with role playing. How often should we do it to see improvement?
The more the better. Even if you can only spare 15-20 minutes a day, it will make a difference. Consistency is key. You could set aside a specific time each day for role playing. Maybe in the morning before you start your day or in the evening after work. And if you're practicing with a partner, you can schedule regular practice sessions.
That's good advice. What if I want to incorporate some reading or listening materials into my role playing?
That's a wonderful idea. You can read a short story or listen to a podcast episode, and then create a role playing scenario based on it. For example, if you listen to a podcast about a travel adventure, you can role play as two friends discussing the places they heard about in the podcast. One could say, "I really want to visit that island they mentioned. It sounds so beautiful." The other could respond with, "Yeah, but I heard it's quite expensive to get there. How are we going to afford it?" This way, you're using the content you've consumed to fuel your role, playing and improve your speaking.
That's really creative. What about using props in role playing? Does it help?
Definitely. Props can make the role playing more immersive. In the coffee shop scenario, you could use a toy coffee cup and a pretend cash register. If you're doing a shopping scenario, you could use some old clothes as the items for sale. When you hold a prop, it makes it easier to get into character and also helps you remember the context of the conversation. For example, if you're holding a menu in a restaurant scenario, it's more natural to talk about food items on it.
I can imagine that. What about dealing with cultural aspects in role playing, since English is spoken in many different cultures?
That's a great point. When choosing scenarios, you can explore different cultural settings. For example, you could do a scenario in an English-speaking country's traditional tea ceremony. You need to learn about the customs, the proper way to greet, and the vocabulary related to the ceremony. This not only improves your English, but also broadens your cultural knowledge. Also, if you're practicing with someone from a different culture, you can have interesting conversations about cultural differences during the role playing.
So role playing is really a multifaceted way to learn English. Any final tips?
Yes, always have fun with it. The more you enjoy the role playing, the more likely you are to keep doing it. Don't be too hard on yourself if you make mistakes. Remember, every mistake is a learning opportunity. And try to be as creative as possible with your scenarios and roles. The sky's the limit when it comes to using role playing to master English speaking.
Thanks, Myra. This has been really helpful. I can't wait to start role playing and see my English improve.
You're welcome, Alex. I'm sure you'll see great progress with consistent role-playing practice. Let's start planning our first role-playing session soon.